I would now like to welcome our third speaker, Mike Gill, owner of Texas Senior Living Options. Mike earned an MBA from the University of Texas, hook 'em horns. Mike's corporate background includes banking and finance as an investment professional, working in venture capital, and later on Wall Street. He co-authored 2 books on finance and capital. When wanting to make a difference in helping families, Mike left the financial world and founded Texas Senior Living Locators in 2012. He's a certified senior advisor and stays current on local and national elder care developments and resources. Please help me welcome Mike Gill.
Very smooth way to start microphone. Thank you. My name is Michael Gill. I'm with Texas Senior Living Locators. What my business is, it's a free service helping people find assisted living, independent living, and memory care. I also deal occasionally with skilled nursing homes. And my goal today is to walk you through the senior living industry. Now, most people stay at home for as long as they can. And that's perfectly good, and that's where most people would like to die as compared to going to the senior living community. But that's not always the case, that's possible, and so what I'd like to do is just sort of walk you through what the various different levels and options are. Because things have changed over the last 20 or 30 years. It used to be that we had skilled nursing homes and we had hospitals. A skilled nursing home was where you went to die, and a hospital was where you went to get well. And so, for example, somebody would fall and break their hip, and the hospital would keep you for 2 or 3 weeks and then send you on home. And during that 2 or 3 weeks, they'd fix your hip, and then they would give you rehab. Well, things have changed now, and so there's a whole continuum of care. And what I'm trying to do is walk you through which part is appropriate at what time. To the next slide, please. This is a picture of me with my mother. I am going through this currently myself. My mother's been in a memory care facility for the last 3 years, and it's been a long journey. She had pneumonia in the hospital, and she's actually broke her hip 3 months ago in the hospital. So I know what a lot of you are going through from Caregiver. In terms of Austin, and in terms of the senior living community, there's basically 4 levels of care that we're going to talk about. There's skilled nursing, assisted living, memory care, and independent. In Austin, I've just got a list of, this is about a year old, of amounts and sizes of different communities. In general, there are, most beds are in independent living. There's about 3,000 people who live in independent living, about 5,500 skilled nursing. You see some of the other statistics there. And the different sizes of the facilities. Next slide, please. What's interesting to know is that the assisted living industry is really quite new. Assisted living really didn't get started very much in Austin until about the mid-1990s. Prior to that, there was some independent living, but as you can see, in assisted living, there was fewer than 300 beds up until about 1995. Today, there are almost 2,500 or over 3,000 beds in assisted living, and it's been growing year by year. Some years it's been growing as much as 25%. Most recently, what's really been growing has been memory care. And one of the reasons that memory care has been growing faster than other things is because we have more people living longer, and so people are living to the point where they need memory care. Memory care, Alzheimer's, is essentially the next threshold disease after, say, people would have been dying of heart disease and lung disease, but because they're living longer, they're now coming down with memory issues. Also, quite frankly, memory care tends to be more profitable, and that's why they're building more memory care facilities in assisted living. Next slide. What I want to do is just talk about the continuum of care, starting at the top and working our way down. The hospitals is where a lot of people will end up. Next slide, please. And so, for example, this is North Austin Medical Center. The thing about hospitals, though, of course, is number 1, they're institutional. Number 2, they're short-term. And number 3, they're expensive. As I said, my mother broke her hip about 3 months ago. Breaking a hip, I think my bill was $35,000 for a 5-night stay in a hospital. So what's going on is that insurance companies have long since figured out that hospitals, because they've got doctors and nurses and operating theaters, that's not where you want to keep somebody. It costs generally over $5,000 a night to keep somebody in a hospital. So these days, when you fall and break a hip, they have you out of the hospital within 4 days. And instead of doing your rehab there, you do it in a skilled nursing home. So next slide, please. The skilled nursing homes also tend to be on the institutional side. This is a typical skilled nursing home. It's Sagebrook up in Cedar Park. The reason I have an overhead shot of that is because generally what ends up happening in a skilled nursing is that you have, say, 4 or 5 halls, and then right in the middle, you have a nurse's station. And that way the nurse's stations can look down all the hallways. And so the point is that it has much more of an institutional feel. The rooms are hospital rooms. They've got 2 beds and a curtain in between. So who goes to a skilled nursing home? Next slide, please. So generally, skilled nursing homes there's 3 different type of patients or residents in a skilled nursing home. An average skilled nursing home is going to have about 20% of their residents are going to be there for short-term rehab. Nursing homes used to be called nursing homes now, but now they're called skilled nursing homes because the nursing homes have added the skilled services: occupational therapy, physical therapy, and speech therapy. So instead of being in the hospital receiving these therapies, you go to a nursing home. Of the 80% of residents that aren't there short-term, they're going to be long-term residents. Over half of the residents in a skilled nursing home that are long-term are going to be there on Medicaid. To qualify for Medicaid, you have to have less than $2,100 of income, less than $2,000 of assets, and you have to have medical necessity. I would bet somewhere between 80 and 90% of the medical necessity cases in a skilled nursing home are there because of dementia. So then the last people that would be in a skilled nursing home are going to be there on private pay. Private pay clients are there because of medical necessity. In Texas, there are regulations where you can go to assisted living, and there are regulations when you go to a skilled nursing home. You have to go to a skilled nursing home, and you're not allowed to go to an assisted living if you're bedbound, if you're on a ventilator, certain types of feeding tubes, if you have IV drips and things like that. So the moral to this story is basically medical necessity and financial need is why you go to a skilled nursing home, unless it's for a short-term payment. Now, if you're in a skilled nursing home, your favorite client is a short-term resident because they get paid about $600 a night when they're giving rehab. Their next most preferable client is going to be somebody who's there on private pay. What does it cost in a nursing home? It costs, on private pay, the cheapest nursing homes in town is going to be about $4,500 a month, about $150 a day. That number goes up to as high as $350 a day for a private room at one of the more upscale nursing homes. Generally, you can expect to pay $175 to $225 a day in a nursing home. And if you were someplace other than Austin, those prices can go up substantially. So the second most profitable resident for a nursing home is private pay. The least profitable resident for a nursing home is a Medicaid resident. Generally, they get paid $125 to $150 a day for a Medicaid resident, but they want to keep full as they can. So what a nursing home is always trying to do is keep as few Medicaid residents as they can, as many of the other residents, and they try and maximize their revenues. I only go over this just so so everybody understands what goes on in these places and what their incentives are. Medicaid residents are treated well, but they are the least profitable, and so they're the least attractive from their perspective. At any rate, in a skilled nursing home, the reason you go there primarily is for 2 reasons. Financial for on Medicaid, and number 2, medical necessity. So, assisted living communities. Brookdale should like this slide. Actually, this is Brookdale Gaines Ranch. They went ahead and gave our lunches today, so we should be appreciative of them. At any rate, assisted living communities are the next area I'd like to talk about. What you need to understand about assisted living communities is that they are custodial care. Whereas it's medical necessity in a skilled nursing, it's custodial care at an assisted living. So what we need to talk about are the 7 activities of daily living. So what are activities of daily living? Dressing, bathing, eating, and when we say eating, it's feeding yourself, getting the food from your plate to your mouth, not cooking. Transferring means getting out of bed or out of a chair to your wheelchair, to your walker, or to the toilet. The fifth one would be toileting. Toileting means getting on and off the toilet, doing the necessary steps to clean yourself, and getting back to your walker. And then there's incontinence. Those are 6 activities of daily living. Those are the official activities of daily living. The reason I say those are official is because they're necessary for both long-term care insurance as well as for veterans benefits. There's a 7th activity of daily living, which is medication management, and this is what most people need. Now, the reason I go over all these is the fact that you'll notice that none of these are skilled services. All these are services that a son or a daughter or a grandchild could do without any particular training. So assisted living is custodial care. Now, there's a couple of differences that we should talk about just regulatorily about assisted living. There's large assisted living, which is anything over 17 beds. There's small assisted living, which is 16 beds down to 4 beds. And then there are unlicensed personal care homes, which is 3 beds and over. So if you have three or more people living together, receiving activities of daily living, it has to be a licensed facility. Personal care homes under 3 beds, they're unlicensed. That's sometimes good, and sometimes I recommend these places because they can do things that a licensed place can't. They can do feeding tubes, they can do ventilators, they can do shots because they're not licensed or regulated. There's also 2 types of assisted living, type A and type B. Type A assisted living, all the residents have to be able to self-evacuate within 13 minutes. Type B assisted living, they can have people who can't self-evacuate, but they have to have enough staff to make sure everybody can get out again in 13 minutes in case of a fire or something. Now that's important for me when I'm trying to help people find assisted living, because if somebody's in a wheelchair or they're going downhill quickly, I don't want to put them someplace in a type A assisted living that they may have to move again in short term if they decline to the point when they can't be in a type A assisted living. Again, assisted livings, they're prohibited by regulation from accepting bed-bound, ventilators, feeding tubes, tracheotomies, IV drips, and this type of thing. Again, so it's custodial care and not medical necessity. And perhaps for a lot of people, the most important thing is that it is all private pay. So the only insurance that will pay for assisted living is if you've bought long-term care insurance. Long-term care insurance, only about 4% of the people living in an assisted living in general have long-term care insurance. I usually find the people who have it have been frequently government workers who've been able to buy long-term care insurance through one of their plans. When at year end they're going ahead and figuring out all their insurance, they just tick off which boxes, and that's where a lot of people have long-term care insurance. There's also veterans benefits. Veterans benefits can sometimes help pay for assisted living. And I don't want to get too much into veterans benefits. You should come talk to me about veterans benefits afterwards. But in general, if you've served in the military during a time of war, or your spouse had served in the military during a time of war and you were not divorced, then for the veteran himself, you can go ahead and get somewhere around just under $1,800 of veterans benefits per month for the veteran himself, and for the spouse, you can get about $1,150 of benefits a month. Veterans benefits can be a little bit on the complicated side, but come up and talk to us afterwards if you want to know more about that. Next slide, please. So the pricing in an assisted living is complicated. I told you what the pricing was in skilled nursing. It's a lot more straightforward. In assisted living, typically, what you get is you get a base price, and then you have a cafeteria menu of extra prices. And these things can, everybody's a little bit different. So getting an apples-to-apples comparison, going to assisted living A or assisted living B, and saying, these are the services I need, they price it differently, and it's often very confusing. Some places will give you levels of care where every different level of care is $300, $600, $900 or something. Other places will go ahead and do points, and a certain number of points for different services adds up to extra levels of care. So in general, the base price gets you 4 walls and some carpet. You get to go ahead and bring your own furniture. It gets you 3 meals a day. And then if you need bathing assistance, that's usually twice a week for bathing. That might be $100 extra. If you need medication management, that might be $300 to $500 extra. Some places throw that in, some places don't. Everything adds up. So, and one thing I want to mention about assisted living, independent living, and memory care, there's almost always a community fee. The community fee is a move-in fee, usually averages around $2,000. Sometimes it's as high as 1 month's rent. But all the big places, so some of the smaller places under 10 beds won't charge community fee, but almost all the big places do. Just to give you an idea, though, the starting price of a shared room is about $1,800 a month. The studio is about $2,400 a month. I can find 2 bedrooms as low as about $3,200 a month to start, but again, that goes up depending on the levels of care. Some places will charge extra for incontinence. Some people will charge for incontinence just because it's more work to take care of incontinence. But almost every place will charge extra for incontinence products because that's a consumable item. There's pet fees. There can be location. Some people will charge more on the ground floor because people have pets and want to be able to take them outside. Some people will charge more on the top floors because there's a nicer view. Sometimes they charge for balconies, etc. In a lot of places, people will have special diets, and they'll charge extra for special diets, whether it's for thickened liquids or for mechanical soft or pureed foods. Some people include it. So my biggest takeaway from this is it's complicated. And so when we talk about it, I can give you, when I talk with people, I can give them a general guidance about what it's going to take for a place. But we always have to ask every place individually because it changes. Also, what they'll do is when they accept a resident, they'll go ahead and they'll send out a nurse, and the nurse will go ahead and put together a care plan. And it's not until the care plan's in place that you really know what your cost is going to be. Usually the marketing person can go ahead and give you a good guess saying, well, given what you've told me, I think it's going to be about $3,800. But they can't refine that until they've done a real care plan. Next slide, please. So memory care. So what's the difference between assisted living and memory care? In Texas, assisted living, memory care is an assisted living license. And the memory care community has to give everybody who works there at least 3 hours of extra training. Well, 3 hours of extra training is practically nothing. Most of them give much more than that, but from a regulatory perspective, there's very little difference. The primary difference, though, is that there is a lock on the front door. There's usually a keypad, and that's why the residents can't get out. So, next slide. So, it's very similar licensing regulations, as I say. Memory care is always a Type B community. What that means, again, is that the memory care residents, they can't self-evacuate, so all the memory care have to have enough staff that they can evacuate all the residents within 13 minutes. They're always secure. Generally, there's a better caregiver to resident ratio. So let's just sort of take an aside here and talk about the caregiver ratios. So what we're talking about is a caregiver who is helping with dressing, bathing, eating, all the activities of daily living. Some places, the caregivers also have to do hospitality, meaning they have to clean the beds and take out the trash. Sometimes they also have to do the laundry. So when you're talking ratios, it's not always apples to apples because some caregivers have to do more work than other people. But as a general rule of thumb, in a memory care facility, you're going to have about 8 residents per caregiver. That's a fairly low caregiver ratio. Sometimes it'll get down to 4 or 5 to 1 when there's areas where there's a very high need resident. But generally, 8 to 1 is a good sort of average number to use in memory care. In assisted living, I'd say it's about 12 to 1 is the average ratio. There are some assisted livings where I know it's 20 to 1, but there's some where it's better than that too. In skilled nursing, it's usually 16 to 20 to 1 residents caregiver ratios. But that's a little bit misleading too because they also have nurses. But the nurses aren't always doing the caregiving. They're frequently doing a lot of the administration and paperwork and charting. So in my opinion, the people in a skilled nursing most often are not getting as good care as they would get in an assisted living, which is always kind of interesting. At any rate, the other thing about memory care communities is that generally the staff is better trained. In memory care, when you get there, the people with memory care, they can have good days and they can have bad days. And the staff knows this. And so they're ready to sort of step in and sort of take ownership of all the residents. Whereas in assisted living, there's meals and there's activities, but the caregivers, have more responsibilities, and they can't always take care, or they don't always try and take as good care of the residents because that's not their job, not their only job. In memory care, these people cannot be left alone. They have to be checked on every 2 hours. They have to be taken to the toilet every 2 hours. Otherwise, they're going to have toileting accidents, etc. And this is typical. So generally, the staff is better trained, and if somebody, so in an assisted living, I will tell you that over 50% of the people have some degree of memory issues. Sometimes it's as high as 75%. And they can be taken care of in assisted living. But sometimes it becomes too much in an assisted living. And of course, memory care, it's 100% of people have dementia issues. Again, just like assisted living, memory care is 100% private pay. Memory care tends to be 50% to 100% more expensive than assisted living, but again, that's because you're receiving more services. And when I say more expensive, I'm saying more expensive than the base price. When you go ahead and add up all the services, sometimes when you're adding on so many services to the base price in assisted living that it equals about what it costs in memory care. But from a base price perspective, it's more expensive. Next slide, please. One of the things about memory care is, I tell people all the time, don't pay attention to the chandelier index. What you want to do is you want to figure out who's going to take the proper care, the best care of my loved one. And there are different ways to do that. There's different ways to skin a cat. So, sometimes, functionality versus marketing. For example, should you have a private shower in everybody's room? We good? So, should you have a private shower in everybody's room? Well, from a marketing perspective, everybody thinks, of course, my parent needs a private shower. But from a functional perspective, showers are where people slip and fall. They can get scalded. Bad things happen in a shower. So if the shower room's down the hall, that doesn't bother me because functionally that often makes sense for people. Big closets. Well, there's never enough storage in assisted living. The closets are fairly small. But in memory care, you don't want big closets. People will, men will go into the closet and they'll, say, oh, I thought this was the bathroom. Well, I'm going to go in the bathroom here. There's a lot of reasons why the architecture will matter. So another thing is luxury versus functionality. To me, a lot of the times the residents don't really see the chandeliers or the crown molding or some of the nicer luxury things. That's just background noise as far as they're concerned. What they really are concerned with is, are there good activities? Am I being stimulated properly, et cetera? Now, in assisted living and in memory care, generally hospice can take care, can come in, and people can stay till end of life. I believe we have somebody talking about hospice after me, so I don't want to go into too much to that. But part of the point is that you can stay in these places all the way through the end of life. You don't necessarily have to go to a skilled nursing or to a hospital to die. Respite care. A lot of these places will do respite care, and Silverado was just giving away a 7-day respite care. By the way, that's quite a gift. That's probably an $1,800 giveaway. So everyone wants to make sure to get in on that drawing. But usually frequently the assisted livings and the memory care want people to come in for a minimum of about 2 weeks. The reason is they don't make much money off of respite care. It sort of disrupts their overall community. They have to do just as much paperwork to bring somebody in for 2 weeks as they do for a permanent placement. So many places will do respite care, but not every place. It is not a moneymaker for them. The main reason that they do respite care is because what they're trying to do is they're trying to bring in a permanent resident eventually. So, and again, payments, all private pay except for long-term care insurance. Medicare and Medicaid only applies to skilled nursing homes. I put together a slide of where memory cares are, and this is true for assisted living, but if I put too many dots on here, it gets just too complicated. What I'm trying to show here, though, is that if you go ahead and you look between, on the south side, say Ben White, to the north side of the Arboretum, there's very little in the central core of Austin. That's because by the time the assisted living and memory care got going in Austin in the mid-90s, all that land was too expensive. So when you look where memory care and assisted living is, a lot of it's up 183 to the north, it's up I-35, and then it's further on out on the periphery. This is true of assisted living and even skilled nursing to some degree. One thing you'll notice, there's nothing east of I-35 to speak of in terms of memory care. Everything is in the west part of town. Part of that's because there's a higher density of people, but more of it's just because the economics, that's whether people can afford it. Next slide, please. So in memory care, I talked about the assisted living pricing, and I need to redo this slide because it doesn't have a very good, you can't really see it, but my point here about memory care is that memory care for shared room starts around $4,000 a month, and $4,000 to $5,000 a month is what it costs for a shared room. For a private room, it goes from about $5,000, $6,000 a month on average. If I try, I can spend as much as $10,000 a month. So some of the most expensive places in town are $9,000 to $10,000 for a private room per month. It's expensive, but believe it or not, it's 40% more expensive up in the Northeast. You can spend $15,000 easy up in the Northeast on memory care. Next slide, please. So independent living communities. So what is an independent living community? An independent living community is basically apartments surrounding a centralized dining room with a meal plan. Generally, the assisted livings, the independent livings have 3 meals a day, but some of them have what I call 1.5 meals a day, where you get either lunch or dinner, and you get a continental breakfast or a buffet-style breakfast. What's important to remember about independent living is that the community itself is not licensed to help with any activities of daily living. However, what they do instead is they go ahead and they rent a room to an agency, a home health company or home helper company, and that home helper company will come on in and provide a lot of the activities that you could get in an assisted living. So if you throw enough money at the deal in independent living, it can be just like an assisted living, except you're dealing with 2 entities. One entity for the meals and the real estate, and the other entity for the extra care. So generally, the independent living communities have nicer amenities. They will, not infrequently at least, they'll have pools. They will have theaters and things like this for people. And generally, the residents are higher functioning. As I said before, on assisted living, 50 to 75% of the people in assisted living have some sort of memory issue. Well, in independent living, it's probably 20 to 25% have some memory issue. What I'd call the forgetfuls, the very early stages. Because these places are not secure, I frequently get calls from people saying, my mother wandered away from the independent living community and we need to find her someplace better. So these places are not secure, and they give very good service, but they give different services, and when people start to get to that wandering stage, it can be particularly bad. Seniors can still receive a lot of support, but again, they're outside providers only. And theoretically, you can even get hospice in independent living communities. Usually, hospice doesn't work in independent living, but it can, depending on the circumstances. Also, by the time you're paying for hospice, you're probably paying the outside agency an awful lot of money to keep them there. But that's a personal choice that the family ends up making. Again, all private pay. Next slide. I don't want to spend too much time on CCRCs. We have two CCRCs here at the tables, but I just want to talk a little bit about what is a CCRC. In general, there's a little bit of a definitional issue here. So most people say a CCRC is a place that has all 4 services on the same campus. So they have independent living, assisted living, memory care, and skilled nursing on the same campus. Now, we have 3 of the CCRCs here in town: Westminster, Longhorn Village, and Querencia. Generally, these places are life care services, so they want you to come in when you're in independent living, and you have to buy in. The buy-in is somewhere, for 1 bedroom, say around $300,000 to $400,000. For 2 bedroom, it could be $500,000 to $1 million. And what's good about these places is that if you move in as an independent living resident, when you need assisted living, when you need memory care, when you need skilled nursing, it's all there on the same campus. You don't have to do another move. The economics are a little bit difficult to understand. I will tell you it is a fair deal, but it's not for everybody. So we have the three life care communities, Westminster, Carancy, and Longhorn Village. Buckner Villa and Wesleyan, they do not have a buy-in, but they do have all four services on the same campus like the other ones. By the way, Buckner Villa and Wesleyan are the only two nonprofit places in town. Apparently up in the Northeast and Midwest, about a third of the assisted livings are nonprofit. We don't have many nonprofits here. It's just the way it developed in Austin, don't know why. Brookdale, Westlake, and Lakeway have three of the four facilities on campus, meaning, for example, Brookdale, Westlake does not have memory care, but it has skilled nursing, independent living, and assisted living. Sometimes they'll call themselves CCRCs. That's a definitional issue. Next slide. So I've tried to go over the differences between the different levels of care. I hope this has been helpful. I did talk about pricing on independent living. You saw some of the prices there for CCRCs. Anybody have any questions? Technically, they're nonprofit.
What difference does that make if they're nonprofit or for-profit?
Well, the CCRCs are a little bit different because Westminster started off as a true nonprofit, and they have grown organically. Both of them have borrowed money from the public markets. Their bonds were rated BB plus for a while, which was the highest junk bond level, and now I think they're triple B. What's the difference? Generally, nonprofits up north are cheaper. The CCRCs are just a little bit different. So if you go to Wesleyan or you go to Buckner Villas, they tend to be a little bit cheaper than they might be given a comparable level of amenity. CCRCs generally have about a 2-year waiting list, give or take. Other places have, now waiting lists are funny things because in a memory care, for example, I've seen places where they'll have 10 people on the waiting list and then but 2 open rooms. So people will get on the waiting list, they'll be waiting until they're ready to move in, but they want to have the option to move in as soon as they can and as soon as they're ready, but they're not ready necessarily when an opening comes open. In general, I would say only about 15 to 20% of the places that I deal with do I ever have a problem where we might have to wait for the right room to come open. There's almost always availability. And when I showed that slide early on about how quickly the industry's been growing, that generally tells you that there's plenty of availability in Austin so far. That also is true for Medicaid. In California, if a Medicaid bed comes open, it's snapped up that quick. Here in Texas, I don't have a hard time finding Medicaid beds. I can't find Medicaid beds at all my preferred spots because some places don't take Medicaid, but Medicaid beds are not hard to find either here. Yes, ma'am. Thank you very much.